You know you've become expendable when your boss starts every sentence with, "We need fresh perspectives," while looking directly past you. It was a Wednesday morning in Chicago, the kind where Lake Michigan's wind cuts through glass towers like a blade through silk. I sat in the back corner of the 42nd floor conference room, watching Rebecca Sterling, our new chief operating officer, pace in front of the quarterly review presentation with that Silicon Valley confidence that money can't buy but venture capital can lease. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. She was 34, freshly recruited from Boston, a rising star in pharmaceutical logistics, with 3 successful acquisitions under her belt, and absolutely convinced that experience was just another word for obsolete. MedFlow Industries is entering a new phase, she announced, clicking to a slide titled Operational Excellence Through Strategic Renewal. Her voice carried that particular brand of corporate enthusiasm that sounds rehearsed even when it's genuine. We're not just streamlining processes, we're revolutionizing how medical supplies reach critical care facilities across the Midwest. I adjusted my reading glasses and took a sip of my third coffee, watching her gesture toward a flowchart that looked suspiciously familiar. 12 faces appeared on the screen behind her: analysts, coordinators, team leads, all under 35, all hired within the past 8 months. My face wasn't among them, despite the fact that I had designed the entire supply chain optimization system they were currently implementing across 14 states. The same system that had prevented medication shortages during the 2019 flu outbreak, when our competitors were scrambling to fill back orders. The same system that had saved MedFlow from bankruptcy when we were operating out of a converted warehouse with more debt than equipment. But nobody in that room looked my way. Not even the junior analysts I had personally trained on inventory forecasting algorithms. Not even when Rebecca delivered the line that made my stomach clench. We're sunsetting legacy frameworks, including legacy personnel. The words dropped into the room like stones into still water, creating ripples of uncomfortable shifting and forced smiles. Someone near the front actually nodded approvingly. A few others followed suit. And just like that, what had been whispered in hallways and hinted at in performance reviews became official policy, delivered with PowerPoint precision and catered refreshments. I didn't react. I didn't even blink. I just smiled slightly and made a note in my planner, because while they were busy writing me out of their future, I was already drafting the first chapter of my own comeback story. Before the sleek investor presentations and automated distribution centers, there was just a spreadsheet, a stubborn problem, and a server room that smelled like burnt coffee and desperation. MedFlow wasn't born in a boardroom. It was born in the basement of Chicago General Hospital, back when the company was still called ChiMed Logistics, and nobody outside Illinois knew we existed. We had no venture backing, no market dominance, and definitely no exit strategy. Just 8 logistics coordinators, too much determination, and a belief that getting life-saving medications to patients shouldn't be harder than ordering pizza. I was the oldest person on that original team at 41. Most of them understood individual supply chains, but couldn't see how everything needed to connect. Hospitals to distributors, distributors to manufacturers, manufacturers to regulatory bodies. It was like conducting an orchestra where half the musicians were playing different songs. I wasn't the loudest voice in our morning meetings, but I was the one who saw the bigger picture. How inventory systems needed to communicate with delivery schedules. How seasonal demand patterns could predict shortage risks months in advance. How emergency protocols could be automated without losing the human judgment that saves lives. So I built the brain, the predictive logistics algorithm that eventually became the foundation of MedFlow's entire operation. I wrote the first version over 6 weeks, mostly during off hours, mostly at my kitchen table. My daughter was in 7th grade then, struggling with her own math homework while I debugged inventory tracking modules. I remember explaining supply chain optimization to her one evening while she worked on a science project about blood circulation. "It's like your body, sweetie," I told her, pointing at her diagram. "Every part has to know what every other part needs, or the whole system breaks down." She got an A on that project. I got chronic insomnia and the satisfaction of watching our system prevent its first medication crisis. Those were the building years, when success was measured in problems avoided rather than profits generated. Later, when the state health department contracts started flowing in and pharmaceutical giants began taking our calls, they gave the system an official name, MedFlow Nexus. Not my suggestion. I had wanted something simpler, but it stuck. My code remained invisible, of course, buried beneath layers of user interfaces and executive summaries. By the time the company rebranded and moved into our current downtown headquarters, we were managing critical supply chains for 37 hospitals during peak demand periods. The FDA sent a team to study our shortage prevention protocols, and somewhere along the way, I stopped getting invited to meetings with regulators or industry partners. I didn't mind, honestly. I never wanted to be the face of anything. I just wanted patients to get their medications on time. Every time. But it turns out when something works too well, people start to assume it works by magic. And when something becomes valuable, they start asking who really built it. Usually so they can take credit for it. It's human nature, I suppose. They always want to rewrite the origin story, especially when the original author doesn't fit their vision of innovation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The replacement didn't happen overnight. That's the insidious thing about corporate erasure in civilized companies. They do it gradually, professionally, with enough procedural justification to make it look like strategic evolution rather than personal elimination. The first sign was my team disappearing, one by one. The junior analysts I had mentored, people I had stayed late with debugging distribution algorithms and cleaning up data inconsistencies, were reassigned to cross-functional innovation pods. I was told this was part of Rebecca's new Agile methodology initiative, breaking down information silos, they called it, empowering horizontal collaboration. Translation, I was the silo they needed to break down. Then came the meeting exclusions. I stopped receiving calendar invites to system architecture reviews. Strategic planning sessions happened without my input. I discovered major infrastructure changes through internal newsletters. The same newsletters that started referring to me as Martha Chen, early contributor to the MedFlow platform. Early contributor. Like I was a footnote in someone else's story. A minor character who had wandered into the first act and then conveniently disappeared. I confronted Rebecca about it once, diplomatically, in the elevator between floors. She smiled like I had complimented her shoes. Martha, you're an institution here. You've more than earned the right to step back and let the next generation take the wheel. The next generation. She meant people like Dylan Torres, 28, sharp, ambitious, and newly promoted to Senior Systems Strategist, a title that hadn't existed 3 weeks before it landed on his LinkedIn profile. I had trained Dylan 18 months ago, when he couldn't distinguish between predictive modeling and reactive reporting. Last month, he presented my own demand forecasting algorithm to the board of directors as a next-generation anticipatory framework. He didn't even change the variable names, but he had something I apparently lacked: buzzwords and backing. By then, I understood better than to fight it directly. That's what they wanted. Some emotional outburst they could use to justify my removal, a convenient excuse to write me off as resistant to change or unable to adapt to modern methodologies. So I played their game, I smiled in meetings, I offered insights when specifically asked, I stayed late to fix Dylan's broken integration tests and left no fingerprints. I let them believe I had gone quiet, because I was ready to fade into the background. What they didn't realize was that I wasn't going quiet, I was going underground. And they had just made the one mistake you should never make with a logistics engineer who builds systems that others depend on. They forgot that I still knew where all the critical connections were hidden. The moment I understood they were rewriting history came disguised as a company celebration. It was our annual innovation showcase, MedFlow's internal demonstration of cutting-edge developments. 3 years ago, I had organized these events myself. Now I sat in the 4th row, badge clipped low, with no presentation slot and no team standing beside me. Dylan commanded the center stage, wearing a crisp white button-down with sleeves rolled to suggest hands-on expertise, his company badge positioned perfectly for the photographer documenting the event. He spoke with the confidence of someone who believed that explaining architecture counted as architecting it. This, he announced, gesturing toward a slide titled Predictive Supply Chain Management 3.0, is what separates MedFlow from every other logistics company in the healthcare space. Our next-generation system doesn't just respond to shortages, it anticipates and prevents them using real-time data synthesis across multi-regional distribution networks. The audience applauded. I stared at the flowchart displayed behind him. My flowchart. Same decision trees, same optimization pathways, even the color coding I had used in my original whiteboard sketches from 2 years ago. He never mentioned my name, neither did anyone else. Then came the performance metrics. A graph showing a 42% reduction in emergency shortage incidents compared to baseline performance. A baseline I had personally established, tested, and continuously refined after our first major supply chain failure nearly cost 3 hospitals their cardiac surgery medications. I had worked on those improvements during a particularly brutal winter, often staying past midnight to recalibrate demand prediction models, while snow piled up against my office windows. Dylan pointed at the improvement curve and declared, "This represents the success of our clean slate reconstruction approach, built by our forward-thinking development team." I gripped my coffee cup tighter. From across the room, I noticed someone shift uncomfortably, Jessica from Quality Assurance. She remembered my original system documentation, but she didn't speak because nobody interrupts corporate theater when it's being performed in high definition. The final insult came when Rebecca took the microphone. She stood beside Dylan, both of them smiling for the company photographer capturing this moment for the quarterly report. "We're incredibly proud to announce that MedFlow Nexus 3.0 represents a complete reimagining of pharmaceutical logistics," she proclaimed. "Built by our next generation of innovators, grounded in forward-thinking methodologies. No acknowledgement of the foundation. No mention of who had laid the groundwork." That afternoon, walking past the break room, I saw a new motivational poster mounted on the wall. "Progress requires letting go of what no longer serves the mission." It was supposed to be inspirational. Instead, it felt like a threat. The calendar notification arrived at 7:45 a.m. on a Thursday. Subject line: Strategic Workforce Optimization Discussion. Location: Executive Conference Room B. HR attendance required. That's how corporate eliminations work in professional environments. Not with dramatic confrontations or public scenes, but with sterile meeting requests and careful euphemisms designed to minimize legal exposure and emotional disruption. I arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in charcoal gray. Professional, forgettable, dignified. Not because I expected fairness, but because women over 40 are trained to walk into corporate executions looking unshakable. Rebecca was already positioned at the conference table when I entered, hands folded like she was bracing for an uncomfortable but necessary conversation. Patricia from Human Resources stood nearby, clutching a manila folder as if it contained state secrets rather than severance paperwork. "Martha," Rebecca began, clearing her throat with practiced authority, "I want to start by acknowledging your tremendous contributions to ChiMed and later MedFlow. Your work has been foundational to our success." Quote. I nodded once, keeping my expression neutral. "However," she continued, "as you're aware, we're evolving as an organization. Part of that evolution involves consolidating legacy positions to better align with our strategic trajectory moving forward." There it was again, that word. Legacy. A compliment disguised as a dismissal, praise delivered in past tense. Patricia stepped forward with her folder. "We've prepared what we believe is a very generous transition package," she said, opening the documents with rehearsed precision. 8 months salary continuation, comprehensive healthcare coverage through Q3, and access to executive career coaching services. They always include the career coaching, as if what you need after being discarded is someone to help you rebrand your dismissal as a voluntary career pivot. I didn't ask questions. I didn't negotiate. I didn't argue or plead or show any emotion that could later be described as, quote, difficult or unprofessional. I reviewed the paperwork methodically, signed the acknowledgement forms, and slid them back across the table. Rebecca looked relieved, like she had expected tears or anger or desperate bargaining, but I wasn't shocked by this moment. I had been preparing for it for months. At 4:30 that afternoon, I returned to my office to collect my belongings. The hallway lighting flickered intermittently, as if the building itself sensed the disruption taking place. My nameplate had already been removed from beside the door, leaving only a blank strip of brushed aluminum. Inside, the space smelled like industrial cleaning solution and abandonment. They had cleared my desk, boxed my personal items, and reset my computer to factory defaults. My email access had been revoked. My security badge deactivated. My network permissions deleted. The elevator badge reader beeped red as I left the building for what they assumed was the last time. But while they thought they were locking me out of their future, they had no idea that I was already holding the key to their past, present, and the competitive advantage they didn't even know they were about to lose. What Rebecca and her next-generation team didn't understand, what nobody in that glass tower realized, was that I hadn't spent 22 years building systems just to walk away quietly when they decided I was inconvenient. While Dylan was presenting my algorithms as his innovations, and Rebecca was restructuring around my legacy contributions, I had been doing something far more strategic than fighting for recognition. I had been building my exit strategy, one line of code at a time. 8 months earlier, when Dylan's team had rejected my proposal for an integrated emergency response protocol, claiming it was too complex for their agile development framework, I hadn't argued or pushed back. I had simply gone home and built it myself. Version 1.0 of what I privately called MedFlow Phoenix ran from a laptop older than Dylan's tenure at the company. It wasn't elegant or polished, but it worked flawlessly. Nights and weekends, I developed, tested, and documented every component. Every algorithm was time-stamped, every design decision archived, every performance benchmark compared against their current system that still couldn't handle surge capacity without manual intervention. I had done everything correctly, not just technically, but legally. Back in 2009, when I first joined ChiMed, I had carefully reviewed the intellectual property clause in my employment contract. Standard boilerplate language, anything developed outside company hours without use of company resources remained the sole intellectual property of the employee. They had never updated that language, not once in 14 years. For more than a decade, I had never needed to invoke that clause. Until now. MedFlow Phoenix wasn't just theoretical. It was a fully operational system that could outperform their current infrastructure in every measurable category. It featured predictive modeling they still hadn't figured out, emergency response protocols they couldn't implement, and integration capabilities that made their next-generation platform look like a first draft. And according to the contract they had never bothered to revise, I owned every bit of it. I didn't rush into anything. I methodically backed up everything. Cloud storage, encrypted hard drives, physical copies secured in a safety deposit box downtown. Then I called Amanda Rodriguez, a former colleague who had left MedFlow 3 years earlier to start her own IP law practice in Milwaukee. She took one look at my documentation and let out a low whistle. "Martha, this isn't just good, this is revolutionary. You didn't just build a better system, you built the future of pharmaceutical logistics. And your documentation is cleaner than most Fortune 500 companies I represent." I nodded calmly. "I'm not here to burn bridges," I explained. "I just want to protect what I've created before they try to claim ownership of innovations they didn't even know existed." By the following Friday, my provisional patent applications were filed. By Tuesday, I had scheduled a meeting with Medicor Solutions, MedFlow's largest competitor and their most aggressive rival. And through it all, not a single person at my former company knew what I had been building in my spare time. They thought they had discarded a relic. What they had actually done was hand their most dangerous competitor the blueprint for their own obsolescence. Medicor didn't waste time with small talk. The initial meeting took place in their executive boardroom overlooking Lake Michigan, with floor-to-ceiling windows that made the city look like a strategic map. I presented my architecture overview, demonstrated the live simulation, and watched their chief technology officer's expression shift from polite interest to genuine amazement as each performance metric appeared on screen. "This level of predictive accuracy," she said, studying the dashboard, "is what we've been trying to achieve for 3 years. You're showing us operational efficiency that shouldn't be possible with current technology." "It's possible," I replied, "when you understand that logistics isn't about moving products. It's about anticipating needs before they become emergencies." Their legal director, a methodical woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, leaned forward. "The intellectual property status?" she asked. "Filed and protected." I confirmed, sliding a comprehensive folder across the polished table. "Provisional patents, full system documentation, verified authorship statements, and a clean chain of title. Everything was developed independently using my own resources." They spent 20 minutes reviewing the materials in focused silence. Finally, their CEO smiled. Not the practiced corporate smile I was used to, but something genuine and slightly predatory. "Ms. Chen, we'd like to discuss exclusive licensing arrangements." We didn't celebrate with champagne or handshakes like in business movies. We simply got to work. Their legal team began drafting the licensing agreement that same afternoon. By Thursday, the contracts were finalized. Medicor would license MedFlow Phoenix exclusively, with my name listed as sole inventor and principal architect. I would retain full attribution rights for all publications and patents, plus serve as senior strategic advisor during the implementation phase. They asked when I wanted to make the announcement public. I checked my calendar and smiled. "Next Wednesday," I said. "That's when MedFlow is hosting their annual investor conference." Their eyes lit up with understanding. "Ah," the CEO said. "Perfect timing." Back in Chicago, MedFlow's headquarters was buzzing with preparation for their biggest promotional event of the year. New banners hung in the lobby. New marketing materials filled every conference room. Rebecca had been quoted in Healthcare Weekly saying, "We're not just improving logistics. We're defining the future of pharmaceutical distribution." I saved that article to a folder on my desktop labeled Evidence. Tuesday evening, I returned to the MedFlow building one final time, ostensibly to handle some remaining transition paperwork as Patricia from HR had requested. I handed her my signed non-disclosure agreement, carefully reviewed and annotated by my attorney. She didn't read the modifications, just smiled and said, "Thank you for making this transition so professional, Martha. It really means a lot." I smiled back. "Thank you," I thought. "You have no idea what you're thanking me for." MedFlow's investor conference was scheduled for Wednesday at 10 a.m. sharp. At 9:30 a.m., their media kit went live. Polished presentations, promotional videos, and a quote from Rebecca on the front page. MedFlow Nexus 3.0 represents our quantum leap forward, built from the ground up by our innovative development team. At 9:45 a.m., Medicor released their own announcement. The headline hit the healthcare industry like a seismic shock. Medicor secures exclusive license to revolutionary logistics platform developed by former MedFlow principal engineer. The subheadline was even more devastating. Patent filed under Martha Chen for comprehensive pharmaceutical supply chain optimization technology featured in competitor's upcoming product launch. By 9:52 a.m., my phone was exploding with notifications. "Martha, please call me immediately. There's been some kind of misunderstanding. Urgent. Need to discuss IP overlap issues. They're saying you built what we're about to announce?" By 9:58 a.m., a text from Jessica in quality assurance. Rebecca just locked herself in her office. "Dylan looks like he's about to have a panic attack." At 10:07 a.m., a breaking news alert from MedTech Daily. MedFlow Investor Conference canceled amid patent dispute with former employee. I didn't respond to any of the frantic calls or emails. I simply forwarded them to my attorney with a single note: "Please handle all communications." From my new office at Medicor, I watched the industry reaction unfold in real time. The patent filings were public record. So was the licensing agreement, so was my name, finally attached to the innovations I had created. By noon, MedFlow's stock price had dropped 18%. Investors were demanding explanations. Industry analysts were questioning how a company could launch a product based on technology they didn't own. And for the first time in my entire career, my contributions weren't hidden in technical documentation or buried in system credits. They were front-page news. Thursday morning brought another wave of consequences. Healthcare Business Journal ran a feature story titled, "The Invisible Innovator: How MedFlow Lost the Engineer Who Built Their Future." By Friday, I had received invitations to speak at 3 major industry conferences. The National Healthcare Technology Summit wanted me to deliver a keynote on innovation attribution and the hidden architects of medical progress. I didn't accept immediately. I wanted them to come to me, to understand that my expertise had value they had overlooked for far too long. The following Monday, a brief announcement appeared on MedFlow's company blog. Rebecca Sterling has stepped down as Chief Operating Officer to pursue other opportunities. No farewell video, no testimonial quotes. Just 2 sentences and disabled comments. Dylan's LinkedIn profile went dark the next day. All posts deleted, connections hidden. Word spread through industry networks that he was under internal investigation for misrepresentation of technological authorship. But I didn't feel vindicated or triumphant. Revenge wasn't the point. The real victory was what started happening in my inbox over the following weeks. Messages from women in healthcare technology, from older engineers, from professionals who had spent years building systems in silence only to watch younger, more connected colleagues take credit and acclaim. One email read, "I watched them erase your contributions, and I watched you make them remember who really built their success. Thank you for showing us it's never too late to reclaim our work." Another simply said, "They called me outdated last year. Today I've filed my first patent. Your story gave me the courage to protect what I've created." That was the real transformation. Not the licensing deal, not the industry recognition, not even my name on patent documents. It was knowing that somewhere, another invisible innovator was learning to make herself visible, another forgotten architect was signing her name to her own blueprints. 6 months after my departure from MedFlow, I found myself standing on a stage in Denver, addressing an auditorium filled with healthcare executives, technology leaders, and policymakers. Behind me, a massive screen displayed Dr. Martha Chen, inventor of the Phoenix Framework. I looked out at the audience, some skeptical, some curious, many nodding with recognition, and began my presentation. "They called me expendable," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent auditorium. "What they discovered is that you can't dispose of the person who holds the blueprint for your future without consequences." But this story isn't about corporate politics or workplace vindication. It's about something much more important: the invisible innovators who build the foundations while others take the credit, and what happens when we finally decide to step into the light. The presentation that followed wasn't just about pharmaceutical logistics or predictive algorithms. It was about recognition, attribution, and the systematic erasure of contributions from people who don't fit the traditional image of innovation. It was about the engineers, designers, analysts, and architects whose work powers entire industries while their names remain buried in technical documentation. And it was about the moment when we stop accepting invisibility as the price of contributing to something larger than ourselves. During the question and answer session, a young woman in the 3rd row raised her hand. "Dr. Chen, what advice would you give to someone who feels like their contributions are being overlooked or minimized?" I paused, thinking about my daughter, now in college studying biomedical engineering, and all the young women who would follow in her footsteps. "Document everything," I said. "Protect your work, legally and ethically. But most importantly, never accept someone else's definition of your value. The moment you start believing you're expendable is the moment you give others permission to treat you as disposable. Your innovations have your fingerprints on them. Make sure your name is attached too. The pharmaceutical industry isn't the same as it was a year ago. Medicore's implementation of the Phoenix Framework has set new standards for supply chain optimization that competitors are scrambling to match. 3 major hospital systems have reported 0 critical medication shortages since adopting our protocols. The FDA has requested detailed case studies for their upcoming efficiency guidelines. And every technical paper, every conference presentation, every industry award includes my name as principal architect and lead innovator. MedFlow eventually recovered, though it took them 18 months and a complete leadership overhaul to rebuild investor confidence. They developed their own competing system, but it lacks the predictive sophistication that made Phoenix revolutionary. They're playing catch-up in a market they once dominated, learning the hard way that treating your most valuable assets as expendable has consequences that extend far beyond individual careers. But the most meaningful transformation has been personal. I no longer build systems in silence, hoping someone else will recognize their value. I no longer accept credit given in whispers while others take applause on public stages. And I no longer believe that expertise and experience are liabilities in a world obsessed with youth and novelty. Sometimes the most valuable assets are the ones that others are too short-sighted to recognize, and sometimes the people they call expendable are exactly the ones they can't afford to lose. The young engineers I mentor now understand something I wish I had learned decades earlier. Innovation without attribution is just unpaid consulting. Your work has value, your contributions matter, and your name belongs on the solutions you create, not buried in footnotes, while others claim the spotlight. They called me expendable, but what they really did was set me free to show the world what I was truly capable of building. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.